Welcome to who's online. We've got Cody online, Maz is online. I haven't had any apologies from anyone. Public Councillor Mitchell, who will be late because he's already on the meeting. So I'm going to hand over to Penny to start this workshop, where we're talking about, well, another discussion about land transfer.
Yeah.
There you go.
So Sinead is going to talk through the slides. So this is just following on from the previous discussion we had about the transfer agreement, and we had the same discussion as part of the transition agreement in terms of how we will determine what land in particular, but there's a process for the broader assets as well, but land, how we identify what land transfers and why land transfers. And so Sinead will talk through the approach, and this is your opportunity to raise any questions, concerns, anything you want looked into through the process. So Sinead, is it okay if people ask questions as you're going through rather than waiting till the end?
Absolutely. The only thing I will say is that with the slides being shared, I can't see hands, so I'll just need to be verbally told that there's a question.
Okay, perfect. This is also being discussed at this kind of draft level with the board, I think on the, is it the 25th, Sinead, or is it in September?
25th. So yes,
yeah.
just full disclosure, the board has not seen this. The board has not had the opportunity to provide comment on this document at this point in time.
For context, has the board fed into this so far?
No, and other than the commentary, the questions they raised in the last session.
Yeah, sure.
That has informed some of the information that Sinead's put in here.
Okay, and for context as well,
Imagine said they have seen the presentation.
When's this coming back to us? Is this coming to, I'm just wondering when is the decision on the transition agreement? Because this is presumably, this will be part of an agreement on.
This will all feed through into the transfer agreement.
Transfer agreement, yeah.
Yeah.
So when's the decision on that?
Well, it depends on how much feedback you give us today. So we're working through the process of when things come here into the board. That's still in the process of Sinead and I working through where are the various points on all the streams of work that need to come to council and to the board between now and July. So that hasn't all been mapped out yet,
okay.
And this is one of those things.
We've signed the transition agreement though.
Yes.
But not the transfer.
Not the transfer agreement. Yeah.
The transition agreement talks about the transfer agreement.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Maz, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
You're on mute, Maz.
You're on mute, Maz.
Sorry. Morning, everyone. Generally, the way that we're operating is it's all time-based. So if QLDC has to bring something to you guys in advance of the board, we kind of give the board a bit of a heads up and a preview of what that is, but we may not necessarily have time to get their feedback. So sometimes their feedback is after we've had input from elected members.
Can I ask one more question? Maz, what capacity are you here in? Are you working for the entity or are you working for us at this point?
I'm working for the entity, but yeah.
Sorry?
The entity.
I'm working for the entity. I'm currently still employed as program director.
Okay.
I represent the entity.
Yeah. Cool. On that one. Yeah. Thank
Okay,
you.
let's rock and roll.
Excellent. Take it away, Sinead.
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you again. I appreciate you getting a lot of documentation thrown at you in the context of what's happening in the water space. So just to recap, as Penny has mentioned, we have got a transition agreement that has been signed by both organisations and that essentially acknowledges statutory responsibility sits with Council in relation to the delivery of water services up until 1 July 27 and how we're engaging with each other. And that's working really well at the moment. Included in that agreement is reference, as we know, to transfer principles and how we will conduct ourselves in terms of negotiating the transfer agreement. We've been through the transfer agreement delivery process. So what we intend to do to get to a final form transfer agreement that will identify the business that's coming across. And I guess just being quite clear that this is the layer below that, which is the principles and guardrails that will guide both council staff and CCO staff as we sit down and work through what the content of that actual transfer agreement is going to be. So I just wanted to, I suppose, highlight how they all come and fit together. So to start with, just being quite clear as to why we're having this discussion and why it is being put on the table that the land transfers. So this land, it's not just the land. I think we need to be quite clear that it's the assets, critical assets for the purposes of supplying water services, and those assets sit on land. And the starting position would be that to be able to provide that service in a seamless fashion, which is the overarching objective, the CCO must have tenure to the land so that it can access the land to carry on its business. So as it says here, why is it being proposed? It is being proposed so that QLDC 3 Waters can safely and reliably deliver the services. Now, it's not, just land will transfer. There's very clear tests that are set out in this framework so that there's clarity as to what the parameters are in terms of identifying what could potentially transfer. So it's critical infrastructure, operational need, and it's a matter of practicality. And things are not transferred by default. We just go through a process. Where transfer isn't needed, and that'll be mainly, as we know, where there's large tracts of land, such as stormwater land, where there's an asset on it, and the whole land obviously isn't intended to transfer across. Council will keep the land, but obviously critical to the service is the provision of access rights. So a question has been raised in the past about the land being sold off, and just want to be very, very clear that the CCO is 100% owned by council. So any land that is transferred stays publicly owned through council's shareholding. And yes, that entity will own the land, but it is still constrained in its decision making by legislation, constitution, and its significant and engagement policy. So council still has a large degree of oversight as to what happens and decision making in relation to critical assets within the CCO. So the key point we're saying.
Can I just ask a question for clarification?
Yes,
That's okay.
absolutely.
So I'm just looking at the Water Services Act 45(3), where it says that shares in a water organisation do not provide the shareholder with any right, title, or interest in the assets of the organisation, unless that's specified in the organisation's foundational documents. So I'll let you have a think and come back to us on that. So I'm interested in, because I haven't gone back to all the foundational documents, but what that is saying is that once we transfer assets to the entity, we don't have any right or title. So just parking that, but I thought I'd raise that in terms of the 45(3), just in terms of that context about these are still in public ownership. Well, unless we've got it correct in the foundation documents, they may not be in public ownership. So,
well, the CCO owns it, and the CCO is owned by us. That's public ownership.
Yeah, but it's removed, and so
the legislation and the constitution put guardrails on the company dealing with the assets.
well, that's the question to see. Maybe circle back to that. There'll be a few other bits and pieces, but I just thought I'd sort of flag that one, because obviously the Act envisages that these organisations will join up, and so if a couple of these CCOs join up, I mean, once we've given title to land, it is not our asset, and if the organisations merge, then they never will be. So
could it be sold, and then the proceeds then go towards another areas.
So I guess it's those guardrails, Steve.
So so I think we need to be quite clear that the land we're talking about here is land on which assets are based. So if the land was sold, it will be the water services entity getting rid of an asset that it needs for its business. So I guess as a matter of practicality, I question whether that, how real a risk that is probably the first thing. And the second thing, even if land were to be sold, it would have to go through a process. So any sale of land will be a significant decision and obviously would trigger the significant and engagement policy. And then obviously there's reserved decisions if it was a material transaction that would have to come back to the shareholders. So yes, the shareholder does not have rights in the assets, but as Penny rightly says, it owns the shares in the company. It has set the constitution that the company operates within, and then the legislation is quite clear on the accountability of the CCO to its shareholder as it navigates, as it conducts its business and major decisions that it makes. So I hope that answers the question, but please let me know if that's not the case.
Okay, yeah, just a related question, and again, we'll come back to it. It's what are the guardrails or principles around disposal of land? So let me give an example. The Harwick oxidation ponds, they will presumably transfer to the CCO. They will be sort of discontinued. Now, they may not transfer or sell that land to somebody else, but they may have a use for it, but also council might have an interest in that use. How does disposal of assets or land like that when they're not used, is that covered in somewhere else?
Sinead, just for context, the example that John's giving there is related to land that has land-based discharge on it at the moment for a treatment plant that is going to be discontinued because the township is going to be connected to another treatment plant in the near future. So hence why it's probably top of mind. But it's a good example of, so I guess the question then is, if something like that happens, where we might transfer this asset and then within 12 months or 2 years, that site is then actually no longer needed for wastewater purposes, what happens from a disposal perspective? Disposal of the land, not the treated economic.
So this is where, when we get into it, having the principles that determine, I suppose, what will transfer is the starting point, and then sitting down with each parcel and working out what's right in that context. So for some other councils, what has been negotiated in a situation such as that is that when the oxidation ponds are decommissioned, if within a period of time after that the land is no longer needed for the purposes of water services, that can be transferred back at nominal cost to the council if that is the decision of both parties. So we can actually draft that into the transfer agreement. So it's just a matter of going through what are the principles that determine the kind of the general position, and then in situations like that, acknowledging exceptions arise and what's the agreed position there.
Could that be, if we just bottom out this example, because that's one that's known about, could that be an example actually in the land transfer part of the agreement? We agree the land isn't being transferred because we know within a fixed period of time it's not going to be needed for wastewater disposal purposes anymore. It is open to council to put that to the board of the CCO. I can't say yes on behalf of the CCO at this point in time.
I would have thought that scenario lends itself straight to a lease, not a transfer.
So
it would be simple.
So where that there is, so we might have two different sets of circumstances. One where there's an impending change in the use of the land, and then there's a separate, well, what happens in 10 years, 20 years time.
Well, and I guess I'm just interested in, given the complexity around, putting those provisions in and going through those processes, what is the real issue with just having a lease that covers all the bases, all the things that you might be worried about, or the water services CCO might be worried about? Because this word seamless gets used, but it doesn't mean anything to me. Like, what do you mean by they need it for seamless operations? It doesn't, surely.
Are you talking about a lease all the land?
So that's the next slide. So maybe we can just move on to Sinead can explain that. Yeah.
So just ownership is preferred to a lease arrangement, and the reasons for that are, first of all, for a lease, you generally would have recurring valuation, legal review costs. There'd be a practical imposition on the shareholder to have, or sorry, on the CCO to have to come to the lessor if it wanted to do work on the particular land in relation to the site. It creates a lot of extra activity, shall we say. Whereas ownership is a once-off transfer, leasing is a permanent compounding cost. And I guess from a CCO perspective, there's no operational gain to it. It also depends then in terms of the lease, how long is the lease? We have to get into that discussion. What's the payment under the lease? If we are leasing, is it appropriate that the debt related to the land is transferred across if there's also a rent being charged? So there's a lot of nuances that arise, which may not, when compounded together, may not help council achieve the objective it's trying to achieve. So I think also another layer that I'd put in there is that the lessor may not remain QLDC, as we know, with local government reform. There may be a new entity that is formed, and a lease ties security of tenure to whoever holds the head lease. So I guess the proposition that I'd put to council to consider is that communities are best served when the operator owns the ground beneath its lifeline assets. So if you have an entity who has a statutory responsibility to serve the community in terms of supply water services, is it best placed to own the land on which those assets are based as opposed to another party, which, yes, granted in today's world is council, no reflection on council, but may not be in the future.
May I ask a question, possibly? So it's just as a continuing your flow there, Sinead. Are there any implications? Because yes, we may be restructured, so but so may you. You may be joined up with some waters or something. So what does this look like if looking through the lens equally for any changes for the water entity further down the track? Is that something we should also be considering?
So any new shareholder to the water organisation will be a decision of the shareholder. That's a decision of council in the sense that as a shareholder, it is a reserved matter whether shares are issued to another entity. Yeah. So how you would like, or the basis on which you would welcome another council into the CCO is a matter that would have to be negotiated and agreed.
Okay. Sorry, sorry, I don't quite accept that a lease is in many ways much more fragile than land ownership and transfer of title. I'm party to 200-year leases right now, 256 hectares up on the Pisa Range that has had $4 million worth of infrastructure on it. It's a 100-year lease, 33 plus 33 plus 33. I'm on another 100-year lease, 5 hectares down on the Picaro, and nothing changes hands for 100 years. So in fact, I don't see why the CCO, and all of us, me more than anybody, has a gigantic interest in the CCO succeeding. And I don't want to put barriers in place of the CCO. I want the CCO to succeed. But I also think that we have, and I'll use 2 words, moral hazard, giving the CCO ownership over real estate, which here, as Stephen will attest to, is like gold. And it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So why do we want the CCO in the real estate business? Sign a 100-year lease, 3/4 of London is covered by Pepperport leases that have never been challenged, and there's no exchange of cash. You can have it for $1 a year. The 256 hectares up on the Pisa Range is $1 a year, and it can't change. So why not just have long-term leases over everything and move on?
Yeah. So the reason that we're having this workshop is to absolutely get your input on that. So the draft framework that's been put forward is based on the approach that is being rolled out most places in New Zealand and was the approach that was being rolled out under the NTU process, which had a different statutory setting.
I don't accept it just because other people.
Oh, no.
We should do it.
Sorry, Claire, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the work done to date is on the basis of that is what we had planned to do when we were doing this under the previous framing. So a lot of other people are continuing that approach. We had just picked that up and we've gone, this is what we're going to do under the NTU. We'll assume we're going to do the same thing here. the reason for this workshop is because you've raised multiple times in the discussions we've had to date that maybe you didn't want to do that. And so what we have asked Sinead to do is to walk through, this is what the framework looks like when the land transfers, to get your feedback, concerns, questions, opportunities out of that. And if that means we need to go away and do more work, to come back to you with different options for how this might work, then we do that. So just to be clear though, Sinead and Maz are working on establishing the CCO. They work for QLDC at the moment. The CCO doesn't exist. It technically exists. It's a company, it's got a board. Sinead is doing this work to support our ability to transfer land to the entity. And she's working with me on that to make sure that we are taking into account both the views of the board and the views of council. And so the purpose of this, so this is the starting point framework, because this is what we were going to do anyway under the previous regime. And today is to get your feedback on that so that Sinead and I can take that away and go, okay, well, there's a different view. How are we going to take that back for discussion with both the board and the council? Yep.
That would be great. I think we
Thank
have
you.
options. We can understand.
Yeah.
Both.
So Sinead?
Can I add, there's two questions I have. The first is, I don't understand the concern of the CCO being in the real estate business. I would like to unpack that a little bit. And the second thing I would like is for council to get in a time machine and fast forward 200 years and the lease expires. And the CCO, at the cost of the community, has built major infrastructure on that land, and the lease is not renewed.
The entity is still ours.
The entity is this is the thing. There's a huge assumption being made there. There's a huge assumption being made there. Is probably my point.
Is that it might not be ours, and this may be privatised, and that is the
maybe we frame this. I mean, I can absolutely see from a CCO point of view why ownership is the easiest option. Operationally, it makes great sense. You've got control, you know, you sort of can do your mission, do whatever you want. What I would say is what we should try and explore is, because that's one end of the spectrum, what are the concerns of councillors that, you know, might exist that ownership model raises? And I think land disposal, right of first refusal, let's say we're incredibly successful, we don't need to follow that plant anymore in 20 years' time. What happens to that? You know, if they want to build a golf course, but somebody wants to sell it off or something. So I think it's that sort of, because obviously the assets, as in the infrastructure's transferring, and I guess it's interesting to see what the value of the land is that's going with that. I guess it will be valued separately.
So let's go to Sinead's first question, which was, what are your concerns with the land being owned by the CCO? So if we just start there, then you've thrown out a couple there, John, in terms of disposal, and the idea that the proceeds from that disposal wouldn't come to council. Is that the concern?
Or that there might be land that we would want to use that we may not be able to use.
Yeah.
Nikki has some around future privatisation possibilities.
The future is so uncertain. I mean, we don't know what we're going to be. We don't know whether the entity is going to merge. We've heard from our own staff that the vision is one entity for the country down the track. And privatisation is always a potential, you know, with the governments that we have in place. So we just don't know. And I think this is a community seat that's really valuable. I think it provides a bit of a perverse incentive potentially in some scenarios, you know, if the land is worth more and you could move something, or goes to Q's point about, you know, do they start to get into the real estate business? Legitimately, they'll be saying, well, you know, we can make this much money here, it's better for the community. And I don't think that, I think this is the community's land. Some of it's very strategic, and I just think, especially when so much is uncertain, that the best option is a long-term lease. That could always be revisited down the track in a more stable scenario, but there is so much uncertainty now. I'm not comfortable. I don't see the need when I look at it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Maz, I think Maz had a point she wanted to add before maybe people are turning their mind to the concerns.
Okay,
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Just sitting here listening to this and thinking about the board, I think their perspective will be around the customer and the community, so, and continuity of service. So not wanting to answer any of your concerns, but I'm wondering if the way we do it is Sinead goes through each slide and you give us all the concerns and we just note those rather than trying to address them in the room. We take all of that away because the board will have their own concerns as well. And then as Penny says, we kind of bring it all back for another round where we've actually had time to respond with examples and scenarios rather than
so-
try to
Yeah, so let's just keep going around hearing the concerns then. We're not trying to address them now, it's really just capturing them.
So from my perspective, I'm really struggling to understand what our water assets are. You know, a decent map on where actually they sit, where they impact our community. And then with ownership comes control. And I'm not thinking the worst here, but what I do think is that if you own the asset, you control what happens to it next. And when assets cross over reserves, whether it's recreational reserves or road reserves or whatever it might be, is the CCO going to act in the best interest of the community that are impacted, not necessarily by the water works, but by impacted through, say, a sports ground being ripped up or whatever it might be. And I don't understand what those future impacts are yet. And that's why I'm struggling to say, yep, it's part of our ownership right now, because it's very unclear to me what we own and how it may impact under different ownership. So until we get that information in front of us, it's really hard for me to just take a box and go, yep, pass it over, it's real easy. Because we don't know what it looks like.
Yeah.
Oh, the first part, yes, but the second part is, yeah. So
One thing I would say is one I think it's called Project Bob, I might be misquoting.
Yeah, it's
yeah, so Sinead will get to Project Bob.
Yeah, you know, when that work was done, it actually made sure that the assets were right sized specific. So if you had I'm just making an example, if you had a pump station that was on a rec reserve, it was the boundaries of it were taken right back.
Footprint of the
the footprint of it was taken into the water asset, so that we didn't end up with like large chunks of sports fields and things that just were on a lazy designation for some reason.
Yeah.
So I know that work to tighten it up was done at that stage.
Yeah. And but there's pipes under the ground that, you know, run right through reserves as well. And
I would.
So the, yeah, so I sort of look at it from this perspective that I think I will trust the board to not do anything nefarious with these assets, because I think there's enough restrictions in both the Act and the Constitution. And look, I'm just looking at the Constitution now, it makes it very clear that the company cannot grant security over the assets and the company cannot transfer ownership of the assets without our consent, right? So I trust in the board that the board won't do anything nefarious. What I'm worried about is the government forcing an amalgamation and therefore those assets disappear to an amalgamated entity. That's my big concern. So it's at a different level than the board. There's an old saying, and Q will probably know this, is that, you know, old Murphy's saying is, he who has the gold makes the rules. Right? And I talk to my clients about this all the time. If you can keep your foot on the asset and legal ownership, then you control the gold, you make the rules going forward. So I do have you know, in terms of the benefits to the CCO and owning the asset, given that they can't use it as security and they can't sell it, what is the real benefit for them having legal title? I'm struggling to see what the big benefit is for the CCO, to be perfectly honest. So that's where I sit.
Quentin, Malcolm.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I remain concerned about transferring the assets. Now, notwithstanding that, or transferring the land, sorry, because the assets, the pipes and stuff are, you know, I think are reasonably obvious, but the you know, it's still not clear to me, and I was interested to hear Stephen say that they can't dispose of it. It's not clear to me that they can't dispose of, and maybe I missed something, but that they can't dispose of a surplus piece of land without permission of council. Now, I agree with the points that these are really valuable assets. It's incredibly complex too, because a huge proportion of it's in road reserves, which doesn't require land transfer. It only requires asset transfer. A huge amount of it is on parts of piece of land, so that you don't need to transfer the, you know, we share function with car parks, we share function with reserves, we share function in some cases with other council assets, and I'm not convinced we can separate those things without putting ourselves at risk of, you know, and future risk. But notwithstanding that, the disposal of the assets remains a massive concern for me, because if a piece of land, a pump station or whatever is no longer required, and the water services entity decide to dispose of it, who gets the money and who gets the benefit of that? Notwithstanding that I know we own the company, but you know, I still haven't got any clarity of that, and there hasn't been any attempt to answer that issue about how do we protect ourselves from disposal that is against the community interest.
Okay, it's a common feedback.
Thanks.
So I don't want to keep reiterating the same point. I think it's been made over and over, but I agree with what Steve and Q have said. The amalgamation part is a concern of mine. My understanding from the last workshop, one of the last workshops, was there was almost a hierarchy that would be leasehold first, then it would be freehold if that was necessary for some particular reason that leasehold couldn't cover. But I guess the only thing I would like to understand is how the deed security sits over that. If we can't transfer it at deed along with the infrastructure assets, excluding the land, that may change the argument, but that would potentially be the only fish hook I would see if not transferring the land meant we can transfer the deed. They need to look at it, but if we still can, if the deed can go with the actual assets, not the land assets, it sounds like we can't have security over the land assets anyway. Well, I don't know.
I'll confirm that, but I'm pretty sure that the, you know, not being able to secure against those assets means the debt isn't attached to those assets.
Because the security is going over the future income of the CCO,
Yeah.
not the CCO's assets.
Yeah, similar to that. Well, also we can't secure the assets and the land in the same way. But we'll confirm that.
That would be the only fish hook. I think it may force us into that.
Yep.
We don't want to land. So.
Just one other point, just to what Michelle said earlier, where, you know, you might shrink the boundary to, you know, the footprint of the asset and it's really tight. That's actually a negative for the CCO if it needs to expand something. Then you have to go through this process where you would, if we just maintain ownership, to me, it would be a much easier process.
We're pretty much, I believe, right now joined at the hip with the CCO board, and I'm very enthusiastic about them. I think they're great. However, 20 years from now, we will be much more distant. And given that, there could be people sitting at that table who are not there now, who might decide that they want to extinguish debt through a land sale or transfer, or maybe even find some wiggle room and develop it. So therefore, everything comes down to title. I'll bet Stephen can write the most elegant lease in the world that will last in perpetuity and with no payments, but nevertheless, title doesn't transfer. So title stays with us, but everything else goes. And part of the reason I'm questioning this is, and as a new council, I'm not really completely au fait with what's going on with QAC, but there have been some issues around QAC and their use of land, in Wanaka. And that's because we've moved apart, we've migrated apart. And so I don't want to have, and now we have those issues. And I don't quite understand them because I'm still new, but I can foresee those same things happening 20 years from now. So everything but title for me works, and I really want to transfer it, give them as much leeway as they can to succeed.
bearing in mind the things that maybe Matt has said, where there is a real integration between other things and located nearby.
Do we know what our neighbours in Southern Waters have done? Because obviously they've got multiple councils, so they'll have had multiple sets of council-owned land and assets. So do we know what's the vehicle or the mechanism they've done? Because that would be an interesting comparison. I mean, I could probably ask Taylor.
We'll confirm.
But
This is the land transfer is a common approach being taken across New Zealand. This is wild.
Yeah.
It's been, this is what has happened with other CCOs that have already been set up. But we can certainly find out what our neighbours do.
I think, the slide deck's very clear. Talks about a hierarchy. Personally, I'm not sure about the council. I'm struggling to relate it to real world examples, and I think that's part of the, the range, isn't there? You've got everything from the Shallow Delta to like some manhole somewhere with a pump in it, and it's such a broad spectrum. But we're sort of almost, and I know that there is a bit of a hierarchy, but this started off with a presumption that everything goes. And I think that the sort of direction we gave at the last one was pretty much the other way around. So, but I think you've heard the concerns. I guess it's outcomes, isn't it? It's what are the outcomes we're trying to avoid, and how do we best codify that? I guess.
Yeah,
because it's code, isn't it? The code. Yeah, it's going to be a transactional agreement.
So I think we've heard the concerns, so we need to go away and.
Can I just have one more question? What's the financial transaction that happens here, transfer of land between the council and the CCO? We've got assets on our books of X value. Are we selling them to them at that value with a debt back? Are we transferring them at $1? What's the financial transaction?
Sinead?
Well, the finance team will
just
give you the
transfers.
definitive answer, but it's equity. Be an equity
So share,
increase.
right, so it's just share capital.
Yeah.
So no debt back, in other words.
Correct.
So I think,
We're just going to hear from Cody.
Cody, yep,
Hi.
sorry.
Yeah, just to support Glover's comments, because when we're in the regional spatial plan meeting, MCERT was trying to tell us a lot of how the new RMA is going to work, and there wasn't really, and what we're trying to do with the plan. And for me, I was like, well, can you show us what it looks like, and then we can understand where you're coming from, and also you can see your own contradictions. So just to reiterate the point of giving examples and showing how it's going to work with, say, how we're, for one example, the basin at just outside you guys in Gorge Road, where it's rugby grounds, but also stormwater basin, and all these different sort of nuanced examples, would be a great way for me to understand how you would approach it and the considerations that would go through. So just please, when you do this work and come back, use real life examples that show a different lens, and then that'll be a great way to learn. Thanks.
Just a quick update. Southern Waters is likely to be a mix, but their starting point is land and title, unless there is some reason not to, e.g. multiple uses in addition to water.
Yeah. So the framework that is set out here that we alluded to at the previous sessions isn't that so much everything is assumed to go. What happens is that every individual asset is looked at individually against the principles that are agreed here in terms of whether it does go or it doesn't. And so it's not a kind of everything goes unless there's an exception, and there is a process to work through. I think what might be useful at this point, because I think the concerns are pretty consistent between you, and I've certainly heard what those are. I can play them back to you if that's helpful. But I think it's useful if Sinead can just go through the framework, because these principles actually would apply equally if you were giving a lease or transferring the land. One of the key things that more than one of you have raised is what happens for mixed use assets. Actually, there's a methodology around how you deal with that. Obviously, it's different. There's more risk if you're transferring land versus not, but still, who is managing the land on a day-to-day basis? That question would still need to be answered whether you were giving a lease or you were transferring the title. And those we can talk about examples as we go through the framework.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
take one question from Quentin and then we'll go through the slides.
Yep.
Quentin.
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to draw it back to something concrete, and I mean, I think the shot over Delta is an interesting example. Is that, I mean, I can't, you know, in terms of a mixed use asset, I cannot understand how we could separate the council or the public owned land at the shot over Delta into, you know, bits that are for the water services and bits that aren't, because we have the two treatment plants, we have the large areas of oxidation ponds, which some of which are going to be needed for calamity basins and whatever. Some of them are being decommissioned. We've got routes going to discharge. We've got, you know, the DAD that's being disestablished. We've now got proposals for, you know, the wetland or the, you know, I just cannot see how an asset like that could be separated into mixed use without, yeah, I mean, it's just too complicated. It's just, and I mean, I think that's a good example where, you know, and there'll be thousands of those, and we've talked about the rec centre in Queenstown, and we've talked, which is both has a stormwater function and a pump station on it, but has a primary function as a recreation ground. You know, we've got multiple recreation grounds that form detention basins and other things. So, I mean, you know, as I said, just trying to draw it back to something concrete. I mean, and someone said, which assets are we talking about? I just cannot see. Well, you know, I haven't got a table in front of me about which assets we're talking about, but of the ones that I can think about, they are far more complex than than I think it can be easily addressed by and I think it's unhelpful to just say you can either lease them or not, because there are other options. There's easements in growth, there's all sorts of other things that we haven't even considered yet. So
I think if we just let Sinead talk through the framework, some of those questions are answered. So just on mixed use assets, you don't split the land or the asset across the CCO and the council. If the land is primarily for recreation use, or we think its recreation use is so important that we retain ownership and control, then it stays with us and we give them access. So that is exactly what the framework addresses. So I think if we let Sinead talk through the principles in the framework, some of those questions and concerns might be answered. So maybe Sinead, if you just continue going through the slides, but then we can come back to at the end what the concerns are that we need to take away.
Yeah, and this is just kind of reiterating, this is going through the transfer principles, but noting, as Councillor Quinton said, that there will be exceptions and there are complexities where a standard position isn't appropriate.
Yeah.
So we talked about Project Bob. So Project Bob is a really, really good piece of work that was carried out by council in the context of the last reform to begin with, and then as the situation with water went from being mandatory to voluntary, certain things were closed out. So I'll take the slides as read in the sense that they were provided in advance. I think the key point from this is what Penny has already alluded to, which was the right sizing of land. So where there were certain water assets on large tracts of land, that has been right sized. So a lot of that preparatory work has been done. If I go to the next slide, please. Sorry, Penny, to put you in the driving seat like this. But the key point really is that significant work has been done. And what this framework does is build on those foundations. So builds on the work council has already done and the investment that has already been made in this space. So what it establishes is that, as we said already, certain land has already been right-sized. Surplus land has been identified for council retention. Operational access to land that was seen as being for water services but not transferable has been preserved through easements. There's been a consistent weighted methodology in the framework for every asset. There is a clear, simple way for single-use land fully recognise that for mixed use land, it is a little bit more complicated, or a lot more complicated in the context of some. There's tailored rules for stormwater, just recognising that that has a multitude of purposes. And really probably just saying here that public ownership is retained at all times through council shareholding. And there is a direct line into the transfer agreement. So it really just provides us with the parameters within which we can apply general statements, and then, as we talked about before, go into exceptions as the case arises. So next slide, please.
I think Quentin had a question or a comment online.
I just wanted to touch on that, the bit about surplus land. So take an example of where there was a local purpose reserve for wastewater, and that we determined that part of it was surplus and not going to be transferred to the water services entity. What situation would that put us in regard to disposal of the remaining part of that land? Because if we'd acquired a piece of land under the on the Public Works Act, we deemed it surplus and not going to transfer it through to the water services entity, are we therefore putting ourselves in a situation where we have to dispose of that land through the Public Works Act anyway, because it's deemed surplus?
So that is something that I'm sure council has considered. I'm not in a position to comment on that, but I'm happy to take it as something that I will engage with the legal team at council on and come back with clarity on that.
I am from
Thank you.
memory,
I mean,
that was
just to highlight
traversed
that
in
could be
Project
unintended.
Bob. So if we go back to the Project Bob information, I think it might be there somewhere. I'll go.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
take that away.
Yeah.
That was a specific risk I remember being talked about when we were talking about the NTU land transfers.
Just as a quick point, just around ease of administration over time, like I think that has to be a factor in looking at, you know, what model you go with, what complexities could arise, and what's the ongoing cost of managing all of these things. I mean, I'm just thinking, you know, is it possible to do a kind of a global lease over every bit of land that's designated for that purpose, and is that the easiest way? But look, I don't know. Carry on. I just wanted to, it sounds like all sorts of complexities could arise. It could get quite expensive to deal with.
So we still need, just for the purposes of the transfer agreement, we still need to particularize what every asset is. We still need to particularize what the rights of the CCO are in relation to that asset. And if a lease option were to be a global lease, we need to be very clear as to how can the CCO do major infrastructure or all of the other activity it needs to carry on under a lease arrangement. What does that look like? Because as we know, there's quite a lot of maintenance that's required, and then sometimes expansion required to meet the growing population. So there is complexity in that, is probably the key point, but there's probably complexity no matter what we do it. I'd like the opportunity, though, just to go through the slides as Penny suggested, and then come back and address questions and concerns at that point, because I believe like some of the questions may be addressed as we go through this. So essentially, in the transfer agreement, there are transfer principles, as we know. And what we've talked about is that only assets that predominantly relate to water services transfer. So when it comes to a lot of stormwater assets, they will not, as we know, predominantly relate to water services, and it is not intended that they would transfer. But it is required that we agree some form of arrangement whereby the CCO has got the access rights to get onto the land to do what it needs to do, whether it's to access a pump station or whatever it may be. One of the principles that we set out in the overarching or in the transition agreement is no degradation. So the asset value and service capability must not be degraded during the establishment period. So we just need to make sure that whatever happens doesn't impact the current day arrangement. If we go to the next slide, please, if we get into the framework. So what's the purpose of it? So it determines whether land should transfer to the CCO or remain with council, and what the enduring rights are that are needed either way. It gives effect, as we talked about before, to the transfer principles that are in the transition agreement. And the objective really is to have a methodology so for every asset. So we're going through the same waterfall of options in relation to every asset, and we have got consistency rather than ad hoc. We'll do this for this asset and that for that asset and this for another. Just have a consistent methodology that we go through to ensure clarity. So land transferred to QLDC, as we keep saying, stays publicly owned through council's 100% shareholding, and any future change in use decisions would remain subject to QLDC Three Waters governance framework. So that really on a page is the purpose of the framework, just to have a consistent methodology that we apply across all assets, and as I said, going through the layers. So when we go to the next slide, please. So determining what transfers. So drinking water and wastewater assets, thanks to the great work in Project Bob, most of the assets are on land that has already been right-sized. So this is the land that is needed for that particular asset to perform this particular service. So what is being proposed is that land which contains critical operational infrastructure that underpins day-to-day service delivery would transfer to the CCO. Now, this is on a general basis, so just getting at the transfer principle. So for this land, why do we say that would happen? Because that gives rise to safe, efficient operation, and it gives certainty in terms of what the position is for future maintenance and renewals. It also gives the CCO control over the land that it carries the statutory and regulatory obligations in relation to the water services from that. There is the practicality, and that's been raised a number of times, and it is recognised. Can it practically be separated from surrounding council land? If it cannot practically be separated, then obviously this principle doesn't apply, the land cannot transfer, and we need to drop down into the next layer of analysis. So if no transfer, this is essentially what we're saying here. What's the legal rights? If the overarching objective of both parties is to ensure that water services teams can get onto the land to do what they need to do for the assets, then what's the position in terms of legal rights? Is it an easement? Is it a license? Are there covenants? And recognising for some parcels of land with council, there will be third party interests that may be at play that need to be considered as well. So the objective here is to give the CCO the ownership or enduring rights. It needs to safely, efficiently and resiliently deliver water service. It's not about maximising the amount of land to be transferred. It is just in the context of drinking water and wastewater, identifying the land on which critical infrastructure sits and the land transfer with the asset. So that's drinking water and wastewater. I'll move to the next one now, please, Penny. So single-use land, as we said, generally question is it right-sized? And if it is right-sized, then, ask is that it would transfer. Mixed-use land where it supports water services, but it serves another council or community purpose, then we need to look at a predominant use assessment. So the key point is that the presence of a water services function doesn't of itself determine that the land would transfer. It really is just a matter of looking at it, and we have got further detail on that in the framework itself as to the analysis that would be put there. And there will be exceptions again where we talked about the oxidation ponds where, on the face of it, purpose is for water services, that purpose may be no longer, but we don't know what the situation is. So what's the exception that would apply there? So noting that is one that there would need to be a specific discussion on. If we drop to the next slide, please. So in the framework, we've got a number of factors that we would look to, and this is based on the NTU material for identifying predominant use of mixed use land, and just going through the factors that regard would be had to in determining what the situation is with that land, whether it transfers or whether it goes through a decision tree that decides what's the appropriate action in the context of that particular land. So public value and cost is essentially one of the key factors, and then the others are as listed on the slide before you. So next slide, Penny. So I think with stormwater assets, probably just being very, very clear that maximizing the land transfer, I keep saying, and this is correct, it is not a land grab. It is essentially about the CCO just having tenure to the land on which critical assets are based. I guess we've said before, council essentially through its shareholding retains the land, and I think stormwater assets like pipes and pumps are pretty clear. It's where they're not pipes and pumps or hard infrastructure that it becomes a little bit more complicated. So objective is to balance both parties' statutory rights and statutory roles, as we've talked about previously. I think we're all in the same camp in the sense of wanting to serve long-term community interests. Pipes and pump stations for stormwater likely, depending on where they are located, but could be perceived to be the same depending on the specific facts, could be the same as drinking water and wastewater, but it would be a predominant purpose test. And either way, no matter what the outcome is, the non-owning party would have enduring rights and interests in relation to the land where they have a community purpose. So next slide, please. I feel I've talked about this quite a bit already, so I'm going to skip this slide. And process and agreement is where we will go to. So in terms of the process, what we have talked about previously is identifying all land associated with water services assets and classifying them as single use or mixed use. The framework would then be applied with mixed use land using these weighted predominant use factors and considering whether it's appropriate to subdivide the land in particular instances is something that could be considered. Now, it may be that it's not subdivided by day one. It could be an agreement to subdivide at a future date, subject to certain conditions. As I said, this is about having a framework to apply generically, but understanding specific parcels may lead to different outcomes. So in the context after applying the framework, then determine the appropriate ownership or enduring rights so that the CCO can lawfully own, access, operate and maintain the assets as it needs. The property arrangements would be documented as between the council and the CCO and given effect to through the transfer agreement. So being quite clear that that transfer agreement will obviously have to be brought to both council and the board for approval. This is just making sure we have direction on how to negotiate as we go through that particular process and identify what's proposed to put before both parties. So next slide, please. Oh, that's the end of the slideshow. So I guess having been through that and being clear on the process that will apply, and I know that the framework was included in documentation. I'm not sure if everybody's had an opportunity to go through it. I think the concern seems to be that if land transfers, it could go to a third party without the communities having the benefit of it. And what I'd invite council to consider is whether having certain safeguards in place in the transfer agreement would deal with that concern so that the land would come across. But I'm just very, very loosely saying a first right of refusal back to council with obviously consideration to the price. If you transfer land and we transfer it back, then one would assume there would not be an increase in the price on that. But just wondering if that is something that is palatable rather than from a CCO perspective, a long-term lease we do not know what the future holds, but we do know that we need clean water and we do know that we need wastewater to be discharged. So I guess just thinking about water services actually in the land, my question would be whether transferring the land in the instances identified with a means for council to have safeguards is a option as opposed to a long-term lease when we do not know who the lessor will be in the future.
I think there'll be some thought given to that. Quentin is wanting to speak, then I will go to Stephen and then Melissa. Quentin, and then.
I was just interested in that comment you just made that it would be transferred back at the same value or no increase in value. Now, while there's sort of a nominal value that it's being transferred at, the reality is there's no cash exchanging hands. So, I mean, the only way would be that it is given back to council at $0. I mean, there can't be a value associated with it at all. It has to be surplus land should be returned to council. If that's just what we decide, that's the only, in my view, the only option is that surplus land is returned to council. Now, there are a couple of other things. I mean, just running to the complexity. I mean, I don't get any sense that there is a default right of access for the public to land that could be transferred to the Water Services CCO, where there is in council, so that we're reversing the assumption that a local purpose reserve wastewater is a public place unless there's a need to exclude people for safety reasons. We're now flipping it the other way, is that it could be excluded from public access unless there's a specific provision for that. So access is a massive one. I can think of 100 situations where people like the Tracks Trust or or other community groups might require access across land that might otherwise be transferred to the Water Services CCO, and we need to be able to address those types of things. That the provision of public access is critically important. But notwithstanding, I still think we're in a situation. You've outlined a whole bunch of exclusions where you wouldn't transfer land to the Water Services to the point that probably 90% of the assets won't require a transfer of land to the Water Services CCO. So it sort of leaves me the question is, if 90% of them don't require it, then why are we going to be in a situation where we do require it for the remaining 10%? There should be another way to deal with that. But anyway, I just wanted to highlight those things. But in terms of disposal, remains a massive one for me, unless it comes back at $0 to council when it's surplus to requirements. I just don't see any other way forward on that.
Okay, thanks, Quentin. Steve.
Sinead, if transfer of land was actually a requirement of either the Act or the funding for the CCO, there's one option to sell the land from council to the CCO with a debt back, which is then secured by a mortgage over the land. So title would transfer to the CCO, and we would then have a first registered mortgage against the land, which would stop any sale of the land because they would have to clear our mortgage. Is that an extra level of security that we could actually put in place if in fact it is required that land transfers?
That will be eating into the debt headroom of the CCO, which means that it would take from critical infrastructure that could otherwise be built. So I'm not sure, just thinking out loud.
We could subordinate that debt to the LGFA debt so that it's not really debt. What I'm keen on is that security over the asset, that if it does go out of our name, we then have something on the title. A bit like what happened at Tiwa Banks, although that was a covenant. It's something that goes on the title that stops the CCO dealing with that land without needing our sign-off. Like, I know you're talking about the Constitution says that, but that's an extra level, like a caveat, that would stop that land being dealt with. I'm just wondering whether that's an option.
I would say that, so firstly, just under the local government water services legislation, the CCO can't give security over the assets. It's actually prohibited from doing so to council or to any other party. That's the reason that I would say that that's not a possibility. It is open as a single council-owned CCO, and I'm not an advisor to you, but just in response to your question, it is open to you to amend the constitution so that your reserved decisions are quite clear that disposals of land over a certain amount have to come to council for decision making. You do have the transfer agreement, so it could be negotiated into that. And the third limb would be to ensure that from a board perspective, in terms of performance framework and accountability, that is a key requirement and that there is accountability on that front. So there are a number of levers open to council.
There is, and I agree with that. And the Constitution does say that the disposal of land does need our approval. What I'm worried about is, as I said before, is that amalgamation and land grab by the government that takes it out of our hands. Whereas we have something on the title that protects our position, and even if they did that, we've still got our foot on the title via the mortgage.
So just being quite clear, when we talk about us, we're talking about council. And if there is do you mean an amalgamation in terms of council amalgamating into another entity? Oh,
I'm talking about an amalgamation of the CCO.
Okay.
With another entity that we don't approve, that's forced on us, so that the CCO, the ownership of that CCO becomes different, and it's forced on us. We don't approve it. And I understand that that any issue of shares or any that sort of jazz all needs our approval. That's fine.
Yeah.
What I'm worried about is the forced amalgamation of CCOs, which means those assets disappear into a bigger entity that we no longer control. So that's where I was thinking, if we were to agree to the transfer of land, and to be honest, I'm hearing that we're not really that keen on that at all, to be perfectly honest. But if it's required by the Act or by the funding for the CCO that the land goes across, okay, well, again, to Q Belk's point, we do want to set it up for success, so we may have to think about it. What other protections can we get on those titles to protect our position and our community's position vis-a-vis those assets?
Good. Melissa.
I just wanted to ask a question. I tend to agree with what I'm hearing around the table, but in one of the slides, and I can't tell what number it is, sorry, but it's why ownership is preferred to lease arrangement. It talks about ownership being the one-off transfer cost, but leasing is a permanent compounding cost. What is that compounding cost? Because this is like a zero lease arrangement, right? So when we're talking about that compounding cost, what are we talking about? Because Q's example of a 200-year lease, I wouldn't have thought had much of a compounding cost.
So we'd still have to get the assets valued, the leasehold, and I think there's the cost involved in terms of an extra layer. So under a leasehold, I'm just going to pick an example. We've got a piece of land with a critical asset on it, a wastewater treatment plant. Under a leasehold arrangement, if that plant was to have extensive work done on it and potentially be extended, would have to come to the lessor to get permission to undertake that particular work, because it could extend onto it. It depends on the terms of the lease, but generally there would be certain things that you would have to go back to the lessor on. So it just puts another layer of, I suppose, another layer of process, shall we say. And I know in the context, if we look to Wellington Water, where there was a need to go back to the shareholder in relation to work on assets and the infrastructure to be carried out, I know it's a little bit apples and pears, but just putting it out there, that wasn't a successful model because the CCO wasn't allowed to make decisions in relation to infrastructure in the same way as, shall we say, water care. So that's kind of the point that we're making there, if that helps.
Okay, can I just follow up? So just to understand, so that's more of a compounding process, not cost.
Yeah.
And to me, that process offers us protection. Is where my thinking is going.
Okay, thanks.
This kind of follows on. I'll try to be quick. So, because what I'm trying to understand is how is it different to the QAC being a CCO? And that the land that they're on right now, we own, correct?
No, they own.
They own.
But what's being proposed here would have the water services CCO be like QAC, where they own the land, we own them. And
So-
although in QAC's point, we don't own them.
Okay, so if we do transfer the land, then it becomes like QLDC. Yeah, that's my point.
Oh.
And currently, they're doing stuff to their land that us as shareholders actually haven't had much of a consultation over. And so this is kind of the point that coming as a newbie, I thought, oh, that's just how it works. So in the future, that might just be how the CCO and the new council works. Like I'm very much pro the lease agreement because I can see this just becoming.
So I'll just add one, in terms of the difference between this and QAC.
Yeah.
In this, we have the opportunity on transfer to go through every asset and right size it to the size they need for the work they do today. With QAC, obviously, they've got a huge amount of land that is extends beyond what they currently use for their core purpose, being delivery of, the airport services. Whereas with this, it would be related to the specific service.
But there are quite a lot of examples like Shotover Delta, like
But
how where
yes,
that come
yes.
in. And then also, sorry, we don't need to go into it. No, we don't.
Yeah.
But like future things, when they need more land for stuff, I don't understand who buys that and then who owns that.
Actually, I was just about to raise that point as something that we'll take away to look into, because if we were in a situation where we own the land, we've leased it to them, and they need more land, for example, because we decide that we're going to find 6 sites in Dalefield where we're going to put future shot over, discharges. Or anywhere else. We're not buying any land. Who buys it? So who buys it?
Yeah.
And if you have to borrow to buy it, who carries the debt? How does that work in the future? So we don't. I've added that already to the list of things to take away. I would just note that in terms of the concern about future government changes, like forced amalgamations. Again, we'll come back on this, but it's worth reminding everybody that with the first iteration of water reform, they legislated and told us we had to transfer the land. And so if they were going to force amalgamations, then they would have to write legislation, and it would likely follow similar statutory framework that they had imposed in the previous iteration of this. So the government can always kind of legislate to require this to happen in the future anyway, regardless of whether we keep it now or transfer it to the water entity now.
I was just going to ask one question, because obviously a lot of this infrastructure is under privately owned land. There's housing estates that have got sewer going underneath them.
Not if they've been vested to us, then.
But the point is, we will own the pipe, but we don't own the land that the pipe is.
It's probably an easement
under.
over.
So an easement is not ownership, is it?
No.
So it's a right of use and a right of access. So really, there's no difference, is there, between the pipes under council land in the future model and the pipes under private land? I don't know. I'm just saying, because we're hearing all these reasons why we need to have private ownership by the entity because of the access thing, but there's a whole heap of the network that they still have access to without ownership. I guess it's the point I'm making.
Quickly, Stephen, if I'm just for that piping, we have access under the Public Works Act. We can take lands for utilities under the 1981 Public Works Act, under the PWA. We can do that. And it doesn't give us ownership, but it gives, it could, depending on what we want to do. But the other thing that I'm a little uncomfortable with is all these what ifs. There are so many what ifs here that I don't think we can even deal with what ifs. I think we ought to throw them out. What if we cease to exist as a council? What if the CCO ceases to exist? What if we get hit by a comet? What if we have an AFA? We don't know. So in fact, trying to predict the future right now, I think, frankly, and I like to do it, but I think it's kind of irrelevant. So we should deal with the CCO and QLDC as we stand right now. And then in terms of right sizing, I don't think we can right size anything, and which biases me towards leases because it preserves options also for the CCO. when I got here 30 years ago, there was no idea that we would look as we do now, and that our water needs would be as they are now. So I don't think we can write someone anything. We just need to keep our options open. And for me, a blanket long-term lease that covers everything gives not only us options, but also the CCO options.
I'm going to go to Gavin because
Well, I see the need to just keep talking. Most people have already asked questions. The only one I had was there's a clause in the Act that says that the land or assets can't be used for security. So does that mean that whether they own land or not doesn't have any effect on their ability to their borrowing ability?
Sinead, I think we answered that earlier and that we were going to confirm, but I think the answer to that is yes, for the reason you can't take security against the land, it wouldn't impact the debt, but I think we need to confirm that, yeah, Sinead?
Yes, the question is whether or not the value of their assets has an effect on their ability to borrow, rather than specifically using assets for security.
So the security that LGFA will take, if should anything go untoward, is over the revenue. And then the question becomes, what's the nature of the interest that they have in the assets, they being the CCO? So could revenue be impacted in terms of not having sufficient control or ownership of assets to be able to provide the service to generate the revenue?
Yeah. So next steps.
So the next steps are that we'll take away those concerns and look at the different options for what would a framework look like if we did this, or coming back with responses and information about them. But we also need to have the same conversation with the board, because actually, if these guys go to the board and the board asks all the same questions as you do, well then it's a bit of a moot point because you're all in agreement. However, if the board is very resolute in the fact that they think that the assets should be transferred, then we need to navigate how we deal with that. But if you're in agreement, then there's because one of the board members did ask a question about when this comes to the board, are they going to see options for lease arrangements? So we don't know what the board's view is on this. This framework has been based on, what is being used across New Zealand and what previous reforms were based on. This is generally what was expected to happen. I think that they need to have the conversation with the board, but we also need to work out how to respond to these concerns that you've got in terms of an alternative approach, but also how the risks you're worried about, the things you're worried about, could be mitigated with a land transfer arrangement.
Sorry, are we at a point where we've had a list of the sites that you're looking at transferring?
Yeah, because we already had to do this process under the previous reforms. So this is what Sinead's talking about. Project Bob was when in that process we identified that we had pieces of land that were this big, but they only had and that also has our previous view, but it's not one that's been explored with the CCO establishment team yet, about which ones were mixed use and predominantly not water use versus predominantly water use. The exception to that is it didn't go into the detail on stormwater, because as I get reminded every time I go into the water reform thing in Teams, Stormwater Pete was about to get in touch with us. It's the top message in the Teams chat, and that didn't happen because those reforms stopped. So stormwater was more complicated because there's a lot more crossover, so we didn't get to that level of detail for stormwater assets.
And just adding to that piece, once you've got that list that we can see, is it possible to give us some real life trade-offs for the community as a result of transferring those assets, so that we can really understand, I guess, if there is mixed use and it does get transferred, what are the trade-offs? Because we've heard, what are the benefits of transferring, but we haven't heard what are the trade-offs to the community. I think it's really important for us to get a balanced view on making these decisions.
Yeah, so on those assets that are mixed use, there'll be some examples, and where we're under the frame. So sorry, I'm just playing back to what you've asked there. So we're under this framework that would say it's mixed use, but it's predominantly water. So if you applied these principles, it would transfer. What would the trade-off, what are the potential risks that from a community use perspective or future value to the community that could occur as a result of that, and use some examples for that.
And would that involve talking to the parks team and talking to the rest of the organisation to sort of help with that?
Well, potentially, I'm not entirely sure it would be a very complex piece.
We're only going to
do that.
Doesn't mean.
We'd only be some
Just give
examples.
us a bit of a steer
Yeah.
on what it
Well,
might
no,
I think it'd also be good to come back with, obviously we've got the transfer framework, but as we've heard about the constitution, or what are the other opportunities for the safeguards?
Yeah. So where are the other
within
places that
suite
can be
of
mitigated?
documents that form part of this, whether that's how do you codify right of first refusal, what the value is if something's disposed of or given back to council. I think because that framework would probably, sort of be as important into the future as what happens on day one.
Yeah, just on that though, I just think these other mechanisms for protecting things, they're there at the moment, but those are the easiest things for the government to legislate against and change. To me, it would be much easier to do it via that than to say, you have to sell all of your assets. Now, I'm in agreement with Stephen. I just like that idea that control on the title is the best control we can get, and our job is to act in the best interest of the community. And at this point, so much,
And quickly go to John, who welcome.
Yeah, sorry, I was tied up downstairs. Not literally, but Q's observation about Public Works Act. So the government intent, I think, is quite important here. The government has intended that these be taken more out of the control of people like us and more into the control of an independent board. And to the extent that in the amendments legislation last year, they amended the Public Works Act to enable water CCOs to compulsorily acquire land just as local authorities can. So they expect that that's going to happen. So I think one of the risk mitigations we need to look at is, do we want to go down the path that the government is just going to step in and intervene anyway, when we need to, yes, there's a balanced view, because if we set it up.
They're just required to do it though. I mean, they can do whatever they like, they're the government, but it makes that they are accountable to the communities. And if they're going to take that hardline step, then that's on them and they're accountable. We don't need to anticipate it and just, undermine ourselves. If they want to take that step, let them take it publicly.
Sure. I think that's true. That's right. They will do that, and they may not.
Yeah.
However, if the board has the ability to do that anyway, or the CCO has the ability to do that, and we can't then take that away from them. We don't want to set up a situation where it's even less clear than it might be otherwise.
You're the one dissenting around the table, John.
As I said in some previous conversations, sometimes that's my role.
Just maybe a comment to take away, if you would. So when you are engaging with the board, provided you've sort of cleared the operational points that we've raised, the flavour from this room, I feel, is that the leasehold or leasing is the way to go. When you present it to the board, will you present it in a way that that's the only way to go, and push back against them saying, no, it has to be the transfer, the way it's felt like today?
So I'll talk to Maz and Sinead about that, but I would have thought, based on this conversation, they will likely present the same information, but we will need to provide the board with the context of what your feedback has been. Now, we can either do that within their presentation, or we can provide that separately to the board. So Sinead or Maz, do you have a comment to add to that?
Yeah, we will be presenting all the options to the board also, and including all the feedback and the concerns and issues that you've raised. So they'll see the same, they'll get the same, and then they will provide direction to us.
Yeah, we should.
Can I because obviously this is a tonal conversation for you as to how you want to interact with this board going. So this is kind of your first opportunity at how forceful you will be or how collaborative you will be. So Maz, just for clarity, when this does go to your board, is this a paper that is being prepared by you and your team, or is it a paper that's prepared by QLDC to offer to the board? How's it being
No,
traversed?
it will be an advisory paper to our board for not decision making, sorry, for direction seeking.
So I'd recommend then that maybe that's a sounding out conversation in the same way as this has been a sounding out conversation with you. And then we can determine our strategy as to how you want to handle that based on how that lands in that conversation. Because if they come to the same position as you guys, then actually it's quite a gentle way forward.
Yeah.
I think we present it to them that the way forward is the leasehold primarily, and push back if they have anything else to say about that until such time as they give us a really, really good reason that that's not the case. That is the way to start it, I think.
It's not. Can I just caveat that with, we haven't given you full advice on the implications of the leasehold option. So we need to give that to you when you, I don't know what those, we haven't done that analysis yet. When we provide you with that, you might decide that is not the path that you want to push, because we haven't given you all of the, like all these things we just talked about in terms of what the risks are, what the trade-offs are, you know, what that actually looks like if you did this. If that was the approach we took, that is not the information we've put in front of you, which we now need, and that is the information we need to bring back before you as a group land on. Actually, we are still more comfortable with the leasehold option, than the transferring the option. So in terms of presenting it to the board, presenting this information alongside the concerns you've raised and the additional work we're going to do, I think is valid in terms of getting their view about what they'd be concerned about, so we can bring both sets of information together into analysis that says these are the pros and cons of the two different, if the two of you land in different places, so that we can have all of that information together to go back to both of you. And then we probably then need a joint discussion between the two of you, particularly if there's dissenting view.
Can I ask that the slide deck that we've got was very heavily, you start from transfer and that's it, right? So, and that didn't really reflect the discussion we had previously. So I think that's part of the problem. And there's no point in actually, I think when we had the workshop, what day did it say? Not yesterday, the day before, we were talking about the dog control or whatever it was, or where you're on a leash up. The actual, these are the options and these are the pros. So it's really, really clearly expressed. And I think if we can somehow get that nuance
I think that will come in the next piece, which will be a more policy-driven piece of advice. So you will be presented to by a policy team there, giving you a bylaw context.
It was absolutely excellent.
The next one you get.
And that was really clear about these are the issues that we want some direction on. What I think this was a very one-sided bit of, as in outcomes. So I'd like to see that whatever goes to the board sort of reflects that the fact that there are the pros and cons, and
so
I think it would be it would be good to take that forward. Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Okay, we'll go to Maz, Nikki, then we'll go. Okay, Maz.
Sorry. So just in terms of what we take to the board, when I'm talking about we, I'm talking about the establishment, the CCO. So we will take your views, what we've heard. That might not necessarily be our recommendation. Well, we won't be initially taking a recommendation. We'll be sharing all of the information. If you are saying that you want QLDC to bring something to the board, which might be a little bit more directive in tone, then I think that is a discussion directly with Penny and your internal team.
Okay, hang on, we'll go Nikki, then we'll go to Sinead. I'm just mindful of the time because we've
just really quickly, just in terms of the transition agreement, I would need to go back and look at it. But to me, there are some decisions that are more ours than the board's. Yes, we're supposed to be collaborating on certain things, but this is about land ownership. It is not about, a decision about what we do with the wastewater treatment plant in the intervening year that may affect them. Yeah, absolutely. They've got a huge say in that. This is quite different. And I'm really concerned if we're going at this thinking, this is a balance and their views are sort of as important as ours, we have to collaborate. This is our land and we're acting for the community. And to me, this is our call. Okay. Yes, they can feedback, but it's not the same as those other decisions. No.
Sinead is wanting to say something. I'm going to go to Quentin and Lucky, because then we need to wrap.
Yeah. So first of all, apologies if the slides came across as one-sided. That certainly wasn't the intention. It was just to promote discussion, I suppose, and put forward a position to see where councillors landed. But having listened to the feedback, there's transfer principles, and I think we're all agreed the transfer principles are fine in the context of everything but land. So just asking that question in the first instance. And the second thing is, I don't think we're going to get to agreement on generic transfer principles on land in light of the discussion that we've had. I wonder if a better way, just putting it out, is to actually get the specific parcels of land and go through recommendations in the context of each, what would be the most appropriate in the context of each, and work with QLDC's legal advisors on that to ensure that there is a more balanced approach that's taken on a property by property basis. I recognise the complexity of the land in the Lake District, so I'm just putting that forward as perhaps rather than us having overarching principles, parcel by parcel is the better way to go.
Quentin?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to very briefly. I mean, I think we need to start from the basics of the water services CCO clearly need ability to control and access the land for the purposes by which. So that's the purpose we're trying to achieve. I'm a little bit concerned that the choice we're being presented with is a binary one of either transfer ownership or lease. I don't think they're the only options. I think we need to broaden the option scope as well around how do we achieve that outcome, because I just don't think lease. I actually think there's problems with leases. But not saying that we shouldn't consider that, but I think there's other ways to deal with this.
Yeah, okay, so I think just wrapping up on this, there's clearly a piece of work that we need to do, which is actually to look at all the different options for how the land is dealt with once the CCO is operating assets on the land that is currently owned by QLDC. So just to explain how we ended up in the situation of the being presented like this. This is the approach that was previously being taken. It's what's been taken by a lot of other councils, and it was signalled in the transition agreement. So what we said was there would be a land transfer approach, that there would be principles agreed. We're bringing in the principles. Clearly what we're hearing, and this has been increasing in the current touch points we've had with you in the last 2 sessions, this concern about the land transfer has been increasing. So now what we need to do is we need to go back to first principles, not first principles, and we need to present it in a different way, which is showing all the different options for how we can manage that land going forward. So I'll need to talk to Maz and Sinead about what that means for what they're talking to the board about. Take on board what you said as well, Nikki, about the fact that this is a decision for this council to make, but what the board thinks is important for you to know.
Yeah.
Because actually, if they agree with you, this can then this is then it's a moot point.
But it's our fault at the end of the day.
It is absolutely.
There are 2 layers, because Matt has highlighted rightly, you'd like to see visibly where all these patches, what do they look like. So there's a bit more detail to provide, but ultimately this is quite a philosophical conversation. So I think coming back to that, looking at the options and how you want to tread into a space where you may have a different view for the board, you want to do that really intentionally, because it's the first time you ever do that, it's going to matter how that lands and how that works.
It's also important to know that exactly in terms of traversing that with the board, but I don't think it's as cut and dry as saying it is 100% our call. I mean, it is, it's our land, but the board's view about the extent to which they were going to be empowered and all those kinds of things, this is part of establishing that relationship and the level of control you are releasing to the board as we go into this. So we're going to come back with the advice, and it is your decision, but the board's view is a really important input into that decision, because it could affect the future operations.
I'm not going to take it down a rabbit hole, but if we are transferring the land, parcel, site, whatever, what does that trigger, if anything, about us having to do a consultation?
No.
It doesn't?
No,
so,
not in the transfer.
So if we're transferring ownership of land, significant parcels of land, that doesn't involve, we don't have to consult with that.
No, because
the legislation allows for this, yeah, Sinead?
Well, also you've already consulted with your community on the basis you're setting up an asset owning CCO. So obviously the land is constitutes assets and would fall within scope of that.
But we haven't done that in the context of them being strategic assets, which require an SCP, and we didn't do an SCP for the water services consultation. Did we?
We did a consultation process for the establishment that was in line with the Local Government Water Services Act requirements for consultation.
No, but that's not what I'm asking. Was it an SCP under the Local Government Act?
Okay, well, I think
because that's a separate question, because they are a strategic asset, and our significance engagement policy requires that they go through an SCP.
We'll have a little look into that, because you do have a point, but I think there is a relationship there between the water services.
Yeah, if we can get a one
pager so we know where it stands, because we want to.
So we want to get
if we can get a one pager on where we stand on that particular issue.
I don't think we need a whole page.
Oh, there we go. Well, there we go.
Try and find out.
Excellent.
I'll get an answer.
But within that context, technically, we own the water services entity, so therefore we still own the land. So it might be a circular argument.
We just went down.
Yeah, sure, sorry.
If you own the gold, you don't.
No.
Yeah.
You've got effective ownership.
Okay. Right. We've got 25 minutes to move on to
Thank
the
you,
next
Matt.
topic.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Great discussion. Bye.
Right. So
absolutely, we can run quick. So my name is Caleb. I know most of you know me, but this is planning manager, and this here is Diana Petrushka in my team. I'm aware that we haven't done too many of these quarterly report workshops with you guys as a council yet. The last one we were unable to hold because of timing and such. It became a bit valueless after a little while there. But here we are, we're back. The normal operating procedure is that we come and talk to you about each quarterly report. It's a good way to just go through overall how was performance tracking around the organisation, our key performance indicators, and some of those key projects, and also internal work like strategies, policies, and missions. So what we do is I hand over to Diana, and she canters you through some of those key highlights and challenges that we've picked up and observed in there. It's a free forum for questions and answers, and if there's something we can't answer on the spot, then we take it away and look it up for you and come back to you. But it's really the size of it. So take us away, Diana.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I trust everyone had a little bit of time to go over the report already. So it's meanwhile been published online as well for the public. Just one thing to note in this June report, we don't yet have the finance section ready. That's just due to end of year procedures, but I've been told it's already in the review cycle, so hopefully we can add that on later this week or very soon, and then we'll let you know once that's in there. So for now, maybe some of you haven't seen this format yet. So what we're gonna do with this report is flash up some highlights and some challenges that we've noticed for this month. And I'll give you some comments and pause after each one in case there's questions. And once we've gone through those, then you're welcome to bring up anything else that you wish to discuss. Yeah, it's already been shared, isn't it? How do I go to the next one? This one. There we go. Yeah, so hopefully you can see that all on screen. So we've selected a few points on there. So the first one we've selected for highlights is the material recovery facility recycling. That target has mostly been met this year. Only one of them has been slightly missed, and there's been some investigations into why that was. But usually, quite consistently they meeting their targets, and education campaigns are ongoing to lower that common contamination. So that's good. The next one we've picked out was the request for services in the 3/4 area. Now there has been a lot of challenges in the past, but that's shown great improvement, and this year they have met their target for the 3rd time in
5 other months it was within 5%. So that shows great promise and improvements from the contractors there. The next one we like to highlight is the library checkouts. They've been doing really great and they're achieving their target, significant increases in checkouts, specifically electronic items have increased 75%. So that's quite great of the library to have such a range of items for the public to choose from. And that's the way forward for them.
That's a good question. What changed from June last year to July last year where they jumped up and sort of stayed up? Is the way they've been counted?
For the libraries?
Yeah. Is this library circulation? Is this the number of
Yes, so there has been a bit of changes on how this is all calculated and shown, because especially with the electronic library, that's sort of cross-shared with Central Otago Council as well. And in recent years, they've developed new systems where now members can sign up for either Central Otago or Queens and Lakes District, so they can differentiate.
Yeah, I think unless we've got Ken on the line as well, we could take away and look at that, because it is a remarkable jump.
Absolutely.
But from there, the dark blue line is just consistently stratospheric. Yeah,
June and July.
Yeah, so obviously I only know a little bit peripherally a little bit about it, but we can certainly get some more information on that for you if you
It
like.
can't be a coincidence, it's year end, so there will be something in that arrangement.
Yep. Right, so we will do that. Lovely. And then customer service is one that we're very proud of and like to highlight that they've been doing a very great job at answering these phone calls very quickly. They do have a high volume of calls, roughly about 3,000 calls each month go to customer service. So for them consistently meeting that target is great, especially with the occasional staff turnovers and things like that. Looks like it was, slightly changed from what I have on my my thing. Apologies. Yes, the deployment request we wanted to call out just to highlight that they've achieved their target 10 months out of 12, despite a very high increase in requests. For instance, as you can see in the report, June had 57, which is almost double of the monthly average. So they've been doing a great job in getting all of the information together within the time frame required. So this is, these are the highlights we picked out. So now we go over a few areas that had challenges. One of them is the total waste placed at curbside that's separated from landfill. So that's everything that comes in from the household waste. So the monthly results this year have been somewhere between 21 and 26%. So mostly underachieved, and that needs a great step change to increase that, which we're working on a green-based facility, which is still in the future, but hopefully once that's done, we get better at that. We also highlighted the requests for solid waste. Now, in the past, they've always had great results. Just at the moment, they've had some issues with getting new bins from suppliers, so that's caused some backlog, and there has been a great increase in bins in general with all the new properties. But they've been working through that, and we're expecting to see some improvement here. Next one, we look at active participants, so that's sports and recreation. I'm sure we've talked about this target quite a lot, where we have the factor of visits per 1,000 residents, which is very difficult to see an accurate picture. So you probably remember from the annual plan discussions that this has now been changed to showing actual
actual total visits. So on the July report, you'll see the report is slightly different. And then they will show you a clearer picture of what's happening there, because visitor numbers have actually increased steadily. And the last one we've highlighted there is the food inspections. So they are obviously working very, very hard in achieving what they need to achieve, and they've greatly reduced the backlog of outstanding audits. They're still struggling with vacancies in the teams. Recruitment's been challenging, and they obviously focus on high-risk operators and enforcement actions. And so that's what we had on our list. So I'll open up the room for any other discussions you may have.
I'm just, oh, sorry, everyone's got further. Just a quick question, because obviously the KPIs are things that we report on that are set in the long-term plan.
Yep.
Hopefully we'll get a wish list from the staff of the things that you would like to see, or the organisation would like to see, if we're going to refresh this list.
It will come through in the LTP process. It won't be a wish list, so it will be some potential KPIs.
Yeah, well, not a wish list. So it's a priority list.
The challenge with the KPIs is that sometimes we set a KPI as a council, and then we get a year and a half into it, and everyone looks at us. That's not telling us what we need to know. So there is sometimes some tuning to be done.
You saw the first draft of those in the activity plan A3s in those sessions. Each one included their areas proposed levels of service and KPIs. Continue to be refined by staff, and I think the next time that it will be coming to you is either in one of our September or October workshops with a full list and a more of a spreadsheet format, so you can see everything and it's crystal clear and it's not within different A3s. Because that was obviously a bit of a loose discussion because it was earlier on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mine kind of flows from that. Yeah, because some of them, to me, I'm like, it's a customer service based KPI, which is great that you've responded to it in X amount of time. But I'm like, but what is it telling you guys about the core issue? Are we getting more of this because of this? And are we, you know, is the team going, oh, well, I'll fix the core problem, or like, I just want to make sure I answer that in 20 days. Like, to me, I'm like, I would rather fix the core problem. Why we're getting more of this?
And that probably goes into the customer experience kind of matrices that we have, where we then follow up a percentage, of course, to find out how was that result to your satisfaction. So that's it's the satisfaction quota. You're absolutely right, and that's why KPIs are, they're often there's a constant conversation around, are they an outmoded concept? Because they often do drive sort of attention and focus on the thing that's being measured. And in a complex operation like this, that you can't possibly grab all the layers you're trying to achieve. So these are at the organisational level. What I would say is that different parts of the business equally will have their own operational KPIs that they work through to try and to drive improvements in certain areas, things like that. So that conversation is a good place to table those thoughts, because you may want to capture them at the organisational level, but failing that, functions themselves might take it away and use it as a focus themselves anyway. So it's about hitting that sweet spot.
Because I like the customer service stuff, but some of them I'd rather see the other issues behind it, and so maybe I would even go customer service something after.
I agree with you. That's a great observation. There is some of the deep diving that we do through the Organisational Excellence Committee, because we do actually look quite deeply into and analyse our calls, and we do understand what calls we're getting, why we're getting them, and then feeding that back into the organisation to close that loop. Because you're quite right. I mean, why are we getting that number of calls? And as you see in the commentary, calls are still the still what our community wants to do. And these KPIs are quite historical, because frankly back in the day our performance was very woeful. So it became very important to make sure that you did answer the call in a timely manner, because people would be hanging on the phone for 20 minutes.
Well, you've achieved.
We have achieved.
Cool, thank you. Nikki,
Just quick one, just noting Kingston 3 water scheme still red, last change in status January 2025 on page 30.
Have they noted that for you? They added that.
I know, I'm really grateful to have those, you know, how long has it been? Not everyone's done it, but some have, and it's great. just, look, there's no one in the room who can probably talk to that, but just, you know, from a risk perspective, I think that's been in red for far too long to not have a really concrete plan with, you know, auctioneering around mitigations and stuff coming back to us. I don't know whether that can, it's probably the wrong place for it, but anyway.
Tony might be online.
Oh, is he?
Tony, are you online? Oh, I said it was running. Okay, well, we'll take that.
That's okay. Yeah, look, it's great that we know. I love these reports because they just bring everything up and you can know very good, really good. Just the one would be the Water Services CCO stuff, page 37. Just, it's a bit backwards, you know, 22nd of July, and I know these reports are developed at the top, but we kind of would be useful to have the next milestones because that's what that category is, and we don't really have next key milestones. So for us, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you can see in the one above.
One above, it's got
next
key milestones. Here we're backwards in time. So yeah, just.
I think it's either the first or second time we've had that one in there. So once we bring them on the journey of the reporting, but
But yeah, no, a fantastic report.
I'm interested from a corporate services perspective with phone calls, we've got that, and we know lots of people call us. Website engagement, do we have much data on website engagement, how people engage with our website?
Absolutely, 100%. Again, we will report that detail through the organisational excellence management.
Yeah, thank
you. We have brought some of that information to you in that one.
Yes.
But yes, absolutely, we have complete oversight of all of the stats in terms of hits and you know what is actually triggering interest, and then what we do with that information is we then go back through the website and we reconfigure to make sure that we've got the right search engine you know, set up so that people are easily getting to where they want the most popular sites on the website, etc. So
it was in our first big organisation. Yeah, look at our agenda. That was in there.
Short-term memory, obviously. Is it going to be a little snapshot in this report as well? Just out of interest? Or? Well, because I think I asked the question last time around corporate services and phone calls, and was that tagged to a certain demographic?
I think your best way would be to raise that in the LTP conversation, because if that's then added as an LTP KPI, yes, it would appear in this report as a matter of course.
All right, sounds good.
Question for me, how obviously we got the red, amber, green for the key priorities. How do we work out which of the key priorities that go into that table?
Yep, that's a good question. So we do have a framework for that based on project value and then other considerations as well as like the importance of the project. It might be a low budget but a very high community importance, therefore it would find its way in. So we take requests from yourselves. If you wanted to see a project be added in, then we can obviously go and look at doing that, and we also run that through our ELT and advise you as things update. So possibly by the next quarterly report, we might see a couple new projects here because we're in a new financial year, and so there'll be new projects that qualify in terms of the amount of planned spend they have this year once carry forwards are completed.
Historically, we've tried various ways of doing this to shape up what appears in there, and I think what we have found is that when we're very rigid, then the things that actually the community cares about don't necessarily fit that framework. So we do try and keep it flexible enough to be able to bring the sort of the big issues to the table.
I mean, for me, the missing one there is Lakeview doesn't feature.
Well, of course, Lakeview does report up through the audit committee.
Yes,
It's also not our project now.
Oh,
so
okay.
We've got the development agreement, but it's now in the developer's hands, so it's probably not something that. But it does get reg status through, reporting through the risk insurance committee.
I've been fairly gets reported through that committee. I was just wondering whether.
But if I may, some assurance, we have recognised that there are ongoing questions about Lakeview. You are going to get a dedicated workshop, which will take you right through and give you all of the context of Lakeview. We're going to bring some of the experts who were involved in the original piece of work. So we know that they're all interested and there are always questions seeming to pop up. So we're going to really open that whole thing up and have a wholesale workshop on it.
I appreciate that. So the answer to why it's not in this quarterly report, which was the question,
Because
is
it's no longer, it rolled off the reporting cycle some time ago. I think at the point at which it really wasn't our live project. I mean, if you go back historically, whilst it was live, it was always in here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although it's still a project, and
Okay.
we're managing it,
So I
right?
didn't
We're
mean to-
managing the
yeah.
data.
But anyway, if we're thinking about priorities, political risk sensitivity, community interest. Anyway,
Yeah.
John.
Yeah, so going back to Nicola's point, I think when you look at things like the, what page is it? 18, regulatory services, the food inspections, even in there, applying sort of pattern analysis, you can see where audits are falling behind because you don't have staff to do them. Then you look at the food inspections, they're even further behind because there's more detail to be done. And that's where might be a question to take away. Is that indicating that the food services sector is responding to that? And there are problems arising because they're expected to not be audited as often, and when they are, there's problems.
It's like nothing.
Sorry, that's the intelligence.
The thing I'd say is that we're quite lucky here where we have a lot of, some of our licensed food operators are in a group.
Yep.
So we can take a low risk approach to those ones because we know that the group has good policies and processes and so therefore we can kind of get to them when we can get to them. We are looking also at our processes that forms and to try and speed that up as well. So not only looking at people, but also looking at our processes. But yeah.
Is there a need to get more contracted in resources to get that done?
It's quite tricky to do because they've got to be quite qualified. They've got to have so it's a constant battle, and we unfortunately were fully staffed, and then we lost a couple. So yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Catherine. Then close to home, the Kingston wastewater context, having been involved in the past in negotiating with LIMS for access to and management of water issues on the land. I wonder if that's one that, because it's been there so long, and it appears to be, as it's reported, problematic, some governance intervention to get it sorted, because that's going to close down really quickly if we don't get that sorted.
I don't think that's a PX discussion that was had in RAC last time in the legal section, so we probably can't talk about the detail of it, but I think, it's probably something that's, if we could control it, we would have. But then it's a case of, well, what do you do if you know that one of the outcomes might be prep for this scenario?
Thank you.
It's close to being.
Thank you. Then the other one, I can't remember what it was, but I saw that CapEx was about 20% behind expenditure program to date. Is that an issue?
Probably more.
Yeah, I thought it might be.
14.
Thank you.
Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes, one, yeah. So is that something we should be concerned about, or is that just standard?
No, I think, well, it's an area that we've had a lot of focus on to try and keep pace because this happens pretty much every year. You see it in the last 3 months of the year, everything's on track and then it falls away. And it's always because of the timing of projects, something slips, something moves. The focus remains on trying to keep it back on track. It is always a bit of a challenge to get that closer than this. And this is probably closer than most years.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Smita.
Sorry, someone else.
Okay, lucky laugh.
Okay. I just wanted, because I jumped in there when John mentioned Lakeview and went, it's not our capital project, but this isn't just capital project, so sorry, John. I actually think it would be really useful because we do get reporting to RAC, but it's only 4 times a year. bringing it into here would mean it would keep up because the decisions that are coming to the chief executive come up quite quickly. So
As I said to you a moment ago, I don't think there's any.
yeah, I think it would be
just
really
one change.
good to add in.
Yeah.
Thanks, sorry, John.
Well, can we just end on a positive? I think the corporate services, I mean, they're at really high. I think that we should be like, well done, it's governance. Very, very nitpicky here, but that's like 100% and whatnot, answering all those calls.
Can I give Charles all the results?
Yeah. Yes. Well, I wrote, wow. Wow. I was like, answering 26. 3,000 calls, and they're probably not happy calls. No, she right, but you know.
Very good, thank you very much indeed. That's a really good update and
See you in approximately 3 months.
Yeah.
We'll see you.
I'll just, yeah.